It was Sunday 27th of August 1933, and Gladys Fox was struggling to sleep in the stifling summer heat at her home on 8 Moore Street, West Bromwich. Just as she was finally drifting off, the sound of shattering glass from downstairs jolted her awake. She looked at the clock and saw it was 1:40 a.m. Her husband, a 24-year-old metal worker named Charles William Fox, known as Bill, was asleep next to her. She nudged him awake and told him anxiously about the noise she had heard. He lit a candle and crept downstairs, dressed only in his vest and shirt, to see what was going on. A sudden breeze blew out the candle, and moments later, Bill Fox staggered back up the stairs and managed to gasp out to his wife, "I've been stabbed." He collapsed on the bedroom floor, a knife buried in his back, and died in his wife's arms within minutes. Her screams alerted a man who was passing the house on the way home from a night shift, and he called the police. When the police arrived, they found a broken window and shards of glass at the back of the house where the intruder had gained entry. A piece of torn fabric, which appeared to have come from a coat, lay near the window, and bloodstains dotted the window frame. Detective Inspector Fred Cherrell, Scotland Yard's leading fingerprint expert, took prints from the window frame and the knife embedded in Bill Fox's back, which had been used to stab him 7 times. The burglar had stolen 14 shillings, earned by Bill Fox from his second job as a doorstep collector for the National Clothing Company, to supplement his metalworks income. 3 hours later, a butcher named Robert Newton, who lived a few streets away in his shop, found that he too had been the victim of a break-in. Although given the fate of Mr. Fox, it was perhaps fortunate that he had not been woken by the burglar and gone downstairs to investigate. To Newton's astonishment, he found a bowl of soapy water and his own razor, which the intruder had apparently used to shave himself. A needle and thread had been taken from his wife's sewing basket, and the thief had also enjoyed a bottle of milk and a joint of pork in the kitchen before making off with a table knife and several pounds in cash. Police soon deduced that Bill Fox's killer had gone to Robert Newton's house afterwards and took the needle and thread to repair the damage to his coat, which he had torn while climbing through the Fox's window. D.I. Cherrell compared the fingerprints on the milk bottle at Newton's home to the ones found on the knife and window frame at the Fox's, and found that they matched, confirming that the same man was responsible. A Home Office analyst collected several dark hairs from Robert Newton's razor, while plaster of Paris casts were taken from shoe prints in the soil outside the Fox home, which were a size 4, noticeably small for a man. The fingerprints were checked against police records and were found to match 21-year-old Stanley Eric Hobday of Sam's Lane, West Bromwich, who already had a criminal record. Born in 1912, his mother had left when he was a child, and he had frequently played truant from school. In 1926, at the age of 14, he stole £4 10 shillings from his father and was sent to an industrial school for 3 years. But while on leave, he broke into an office and fired a pistol at the police constable who arrested him. He was sentenced to time in Borstal, a young offenders institution, but this failed to deter him from his criminal behaviour. He briefly worked as a labourer after being released on licence, but often stole food and money from homes, grocery shops, and even from his grandmother. He enjoyed collecting knives and spending time outdoors, sleeping outside in fields, in the park or on the grounds of the derelict Churchville House in West Bromwich, usually with a gun and blank ammunition in his pocket. In 1929, aged 17, Hobday broke into a chocolate factory and gorged himself on the confectionery inside. By 1933, aged 21, he had worked as an electrician for a time, but was now unemployed and living just half a mile from Moore Street, the home of Mr. and Mrs. Fox. He was of slim build at 5'3", weighed around 120 pounds, and was described as having brown hair, brown eyes, and a sallow complexion. Given his stature, the small size of the shoe prints now made more sense. Shortly after the break-ins and murder, it was reported that a Jowett saloon car had been stolen from a locked garage, and the knife taken from the butcher's house had been used to pick the lock. More than 100 uniformed and plainclothes police officers conducted an extensive search across a 20-mile radius. They monitored railway stations, checked lodging houses, stopped and questioned motorists, and scoured the nearby woodlands. Stanley Hobday's picture was printed in newspapers across the country, and for the first time in its history, the BBC carried a description of the wanted man on the radio. At around 7 a.m, less than 6 hours after the murder of Bill Fox, the Jowett saloon was spotted in the village of High Lee, Cheshire, around 60 miles north of West Bromwich. The fugitive had gone further than the police had guessed. A farmhand working in a field heard the roar of the engine and saw the car travelling at high speed before it careened around a corner and lost control. The front offside tyre was punctured as it bounced over a steep grass verge, then rolled over onto its side. The farmer watched in amazement as a slim man climbed out of the vehicle, calm and unharmed, then walked away from the scene. The farmer called out to him, but the driver ignored him and continued on his way. 5 miles away at Knutsford railway station, Hobday inquired about the price of a ticket for the next train to Birmingham, and was then seen walking south, or at least that is how it appeared. The clerk recognised him from the newspaper photo and reported the sighting to the police. But instead of travelling to Birmingham, the escaped killer was on his way further north. Hobday kept a low profile, making his way through smaller country lanes to avoid the main roads, but attracted unwanted attention when he caused a commotion by blundering into a herd of cows. The trail went cold for a couple of days, but on Wednesday 30th of August, Hobday was spotted in the village of Rockcliffe near Carlisle, 120 miles from where he had crashed the stolen car. He tried to cover his face with a handkerchief to avoid detection, but he had already been recognised, and the local constabulary rapidly arrived. When they asked him if he was Stanley Eric Hobday, he admitted that he was. When an officer grabbed his arm, he flinched, saying, "Be careful, I hurt my arm last week falling off a bicycle." He was taken into custody, where he was examined by a doctor and questioned. The doctor found a wound on his left elbow, which had likely been inflicted by a sharp piece of glass, perhaps from climbing through the smashed window at the Foxes' home. 3 officers from West Bromwich drove up to Carlisle to collect him by car. When they read out the charge, Hobday replied, "Murder? I've not done any murder." But detectives had all the physical evidence they needed, as well as multiple witnesses willing to testify that they had seen Hobday in the vicinity of the murder and during his attempt to escape justice in a stolen car. The trial began on 14th of November 1933 at Staffordshire Sizers, and Stanley Eric Hobday listened calmly as the court heard the evidence. Along with the fingerprints and shoe prints, police had also found Hobday's suitcase in the back of the Jowett motor car, which bore his initials, SEH. The strands of hair found on the razor at Robert Newton's house also match Hobday's hair colour, and a thread recovered from his jacket was confirmed to be identical to the torn coat fabric found near the broken window at the home of Mr. and Mrs. Fox. Even Hobday's movements prior to the murder had been suspicious, as he had been spotted camping in Worston Field near West Bromwich, wearing a belt with a sheath knife attached to it. The weapon's handle was distinctive. It was a version of a Bowie knife manufactured by a Sheffield company, which had only made about 20 with this particular design. A group of girls camping nearby also saw him packing up his tent when the landowner told him to move on, and at that time he had his shirt sleeves rolled up with no wound visible on his left elbow, proving that he had not injured it falling off a bicycle a week ago, as he claimed. Hobday's appointed barrister, Sir Reginald Coventry KC, tried to cast doubt on Detective Inspector Cherrill's fingerprint evidence, but there was little else he could do for his client. There were no witnesses to call in his defence, and all Coventry could do was ask the jury to consider how likely it was that a cold-blooded killer could break into 2 houses in one night and stab a man to death in a frenzied attack, then sit down calmly as if nothing had happened to eat, drink, repair his torn coat sleeve and have a shave. As strange as Sir Reginald said this behaviour was, the evidence was strong. After 45 minutes of deliberations, the jury found Hobday guilty of murder and he was sentenced to death. Coventry lodged an appeal on behalf of his client, and Hobday's father organised a petition signed by 3,000 people, but the death sentence was upheld and the Home Secretary refused to grant a reprieve. Those who supported Hobday didn't necessarily believe he was innocent, but argued that he was intellectually disabled, describing him as empty in the top story, and pointed out that at 21 he was only 3 years older than the legal hanging age. In fact, it was only that year that the minimum age for hanging had been raised from 16 to 18. As an interesting side note, Winifred Randalls, the daughter of the man who owned the Jowett car, began receiving threatening letters after giving evidence during the trial. They turned out to be from 57-year-old labourer Enoch Knowles, whose hobby for 30 years had been sending hundreds of poison pen letters to judges and witnesses after reading about cases in the newspaper. He was jailed for 3 years. Charles William Fox was buried at West Bromwich Borough Cemetery, and 4,000 mourners attended his funeral, including members of the public and colleagues from his workplace. Gladys Fox stood at her husband's graveside, their lives together abruptly ended by the senseless murder after just 2 years of marriage. Stanley Hobday spent Christmas of 1933 at Winson Green Prison in Birmingham, knowing that he would not live to see the new year, having taken the life of a hard-working man, and left Gladys Fox a widow, all for the sum of 14 shillings. On Thursday 28th of December, Hobday was executed by Thomas Pierpoint, assisted by his nephew Albert. The crowds waiting outside were undeterred by the crisp wintry weather, but quickly dispersed after reading the formal notices of the execution posted on the gates of the prison, and returned home to their lives, quickly forgetting the tragedy. You've been listening to Prash's Murder Map. If you enjoyed this episode, please leave me a thumbs up, comment or review, as it really helps to support the show and help more people to find it. You can also join me on Patreon for audio-only ad-free episodes. Thanks for your support and I'll see you again soon.